Well, I didn't have an answer. It's just that I think that the mix of evolutionary changes you're talking about has other things in it, and not just the question of whether consumers want government to dictate to them what they'll have. So we haven't uttered the words personalized medicine as yet today. But if the sort of thrust of the medical industry is that it's not the population-wide effective thing that's being approved with a certain statistical probability that it won't be good for some percentage of people, and the regulatory agency is there to decide whether those tails are in the right proportions or not, and the tails get warned, and so they don't get affected, and so on and so forth. But instead, we're seeing a sort of wholesale conversion of the drug industry to becoming something much more like a personalized product. We're seeing a longer-term evolution that's going to bring about a very different set of relationships. So, I mean, my interest in all of these things is in seeing how inherited, somewhat structured responses, institutionalized, built into practice, to really radically different ways of patterning the landscape, respond to these kinds of movements in process. And I do think that already with patient groups, we're seeing many rebellions saying, if we determine that it's good for us, you don't have a right to keep it from us. What I haven't seen is the canonical case where a patient's group somehow wanted a drug and that drug turned out to be bad for some subpopulation within that patient group. So we haven't seen the products liability case, or at least I don't know of it, that follows upon a patient demand-driven quick ratification of a drug, and so on and so forth. So I don't know, I mean, that scenario is still out there. I don't know to what extent FDA in its sort of scenario building preparations for its own staff talks about, how to deal with that case when it arises, and so forth. But, I do think that the whole picture of, the whole role that a pharmaceutical drug plays is shifting and changing in relation to who the body is that's on the reception side of it. And I think that the 21st century won't look like the 20th in terms of the regulatory agency's role.
Well, I think that with respect to this challenge, FDA has a very good story to tell. The question is, how effective can we be? I was at one meeting where a patient representative got up and said, I want to know your opinion on off-label promotion, which is sort of part of this whole free speech issue, because we have, in our particular disease, no new drugs out, in the last 20 years, and we want to, to be able to have more drugs out there. And, this was a kind of an industry audience, and I said, look, I'm not going to get into the legal side of this debate, but if you want new drugs out there, then, and you want good evidence, you want drugs that actually work, and you want evidence behind them, then you want FDA to review that, and you don't want companies to say, hey, try our drug X for this because, one case report says it might have worked. You want an actual study that really works. And I came on pretty strong. Sometimes I'm, try to be pretty, general in my remarks, but there I came on really strong. I said, I don't care about the legal issue, but from a, perspective of patients with this disease, that's what you need. And, I think that people can understand that. But how it actually plays out, I don't know. And the way you asked that question was, how do you think this is going to play out, given, I wrote down, and I can't read my handwriting, but something like given the need to, inform this by history. And I personally think that it's how well we can inform it by history will partly, turn into how well it plays out. That if people view this as this, ahistorical legal question, we get its own scenario, but people realize that this was kind of tried, and it didn't work out so well. I think, and for anybody really, then maybe, we have a better chance, and that's something that is, we've thought about a fair amount.
Just last point, were it not for the Citizens United decision, I think I would probably fully agree with Charles, namely that this particular court seems to push free speech concerns or speech doctrine, particularly. Obviously, they're completely separate issues and things like that. And I think both Charles and Dr. Joshua Sarstein have a point in the sense that it's not like the pure application or interpretation of the law is somehow divorced from a wide variety of rationales that give rise to the law in the first place. So people are going to say, and you see this in FDA, in Supreme Court decisions on the FDA, where they'll go through what the law says, but they'll also go through what the need for an agency like this is. And probably the best example, and one that might give more optimism, is the case Rutherford, which was on Laetrile, which was a case in part about the freedom to distribute Laetrile through these interstate networks, but was also a case about the freedom to test and make claims about Laetrile. The commercial speech doctrine wasn't yet developed as it was now, but that was a 9-0 decision that said the FDA, even in the case of cancer, had the right to do that. And on the basis of legal realism, I think that combined with maybe the Wyeth decision, which you and I co-sponsored an amicus brief for, leaves me again feeling maybe a little bit optimistic in the sense that the sort of people I thought would have upheld state preemption, two of them didn't. Thomas, where did that come from, and Kennedy. But yeah, this is a case. This is a world in the making. So it's not clear how this will turn out. I agree that it's not simply the history of why this is such an important bureau and what goes wrong when we don't have these kinds of regulations, but also a history of how our republic has, and our courts and our entire political and constitutional system have treated this regulation for a century. And the principle of stare decisis, that would have to be abused, molested, murdered in order for FDA to really lose a lot of its power under a decision like this. That doesn't mean I think it's impossible, but you really have to overturn a lot of standard law, right? And although Michelle Mello is behind you, so I say that with some trepidation.
Thanks very much. I'm Jonathan Morris, a visiting fellow at the Sapphire Ethics Center. So in an earlier life, I was counsel in a case before the European Court of Justice where we were trying to quash the EMA marketing authorization of a drug they call it an FDA drug approval. And I make this point just to illustrate how the comparative relationship between the EMEA and the FDA is again an example of something in continual flux. So at the moment we were trying to quash the new drug approval, the FDA's position was that animal studies were still required for this drug. And when that was announced in the courtroom, there was, as you can imagine, a stunned silence from the bench. And similarly, there was a stunned silence when the counsel for the European Commission, representing the European regulator, basically stood up and said, we can't make the regulatory process too difficult for drug companies.